Welcome to this week's episode of the Evolve to Succeed podcast. My guest this week is Brian Parker, former MD and shareholder of Britannia Parking Limited. Brian's journey with that company went from very junior role within the business to being promoted, becoming an MD, becoming a shareholder, and helping them through a growth and an exit story, while at the same time managing a relationship with a remote majority shareholder. A great success story, but also a story with some lessons to learn. So I really hope you'll enjoy this episode of the Evolve to Succeed podcast. Welcome, Brian, to the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thanks, Warren. Thanks for having me.
We've known each other for quite some time.
I think it's probably about 17 or 18 years, isn't it? Yeah.
So, and I know a lot about your story, but I'm sure I don't know everything. And I'm really intrigued for you to share your story.
Mm-hmm.
The things you've learned along the way, you know, the things you do again the same, things you do differently.
Yeah.
But, you know, you've had a journey through becoming involved in a business as an employee, taking that through to a senior leadership role, and ultimately taking shares in the business and exiting the business. So I think you've got a lot to share with our listeners. So let's just kick it off. So the business you joined was Britannia Parking.
Yeah.
What year was that?
2004, June 2004.
Okay. And you joined the business in quite a sort of lowly position?
Yeah, sort of basically a counter system, sort of progressing potentially forward to a sort of management accountant role. So it wasn't particularly significant at all. No, not at all.
And when you joined, did you think it was going to be I'm going to say a job for life, but a job where you would progress?
No.
And you would stay a long time?
I left my previous employers because, you know, I saw it as an opportunity and a good stepping stone, but I never envisaged that it would have been there as long. And I actually there was one time about sort of 18 months in where I was very close to taking another job. So, you know, no, not at all. No,
it would have been if you'd have done that. Huh?
Yeah, it'd be very different. I wouldn't be sat here, would be right?
No.
Yeah.
And so you joined as that kind of account system management, accountant piece. You know, when was the moment in that journey from 2004 onwards where you thought, maybe this is somewhere I belong, and you did start to progress towards a more senior leadership role? And how did that come about?
So it was a couple of years in, sort of early 2006. At the time, the business was going through a relatively rapid expansion and taking on quite a few kind of long institutional relationships for multi-story car parks and bore people with what they are. We were trying to be a smaller version of NCP, right? And as a result, the business was segregated into different regions. So you had sort of London, Midlands, Southwest, Scotland, and each of those had a relative manager. The manager's job was to grow revenue, look after their team. The challenge that was represented is that each of those managers wanted to create their own identity with their region, and it was felt from the operations team, was the operations director, and and Paul and Graham, who were then the kind of owners, that the business was lacking a bit of identity and a bit of joined up thinking. So there was a role that was created. It was effectively to coordinate that and kind of sort of do group buying. So they were buying different types of machines from different manufacturers. Yeah, they were using one signage provider, but it was rather sort of, I like this style of sign, so I'm going to do it my way type thing. So the business's kind of identity was kind of being a bit lost. So they came up with this role, and it was initially given to an external candidate. It didn't work out, sort of 3 or 4 months down the line. And it was sort of early-ish in 2006. I was called in to see my then line manager Lee, and he said, "We had a chat at a managers meeting, and James has moved on, and we'd like to talk to you about the role." And suddenly it just kind of this realization of, well, this sounds quite interesting. I've got nothing to lose. What does it look like? How's it going to work? That was the catalyst for it. So I think it was about March, April 2006. So a couple of years in, yeah.
And that took you kind of out. It kept you on the sports side, but it took you out of that finance world and in this more commercial world.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that was really quite, one of the reasons why I felt quite envisaged and quite enlivened to do the role is that I was told that it had the backing of the entire management team. It had a meeting and they said, who is the person that would be best suited to do the role? We've recruited externally. Is there anyone internally? And I was told, it was unanimous that my name was put forward, and everyone agreed that was the way forward. I was the person to be given it. And I think that particularly because at the time Lee was finance and operations and was a qualified accountant and was kind of running that side of the business, I think there was a possible point where he felt that someone that had gone through that accountancy journey and that I was just finishing my AAT at that point, so had a good understanding of how you could apply those kind of principles that were kind of close to what he wanted to do with the business was important. So you can kind of take that skill of that group buy-in power. How do you kind of look at, how do you understand that understanding of a P&L that perhaps some of the other guys didn't have was instrumental to that kind of roll into that journey. So, yeah.
And at that point, because I would describe you as somebody that is ambitious and is very driven. Were you hungry for success back then?
Yeah, clearly, yeah. I mean, I knew when because I'd sort of taken, I'd sort of gone into a sort of retail management positions in my earlier sort of life, and realised that to fully understand how business work, you had to understand what drove it, which was fundamentally numbers, right? So I actually took a step back to take a step forward. Went back to night school, started doing my qualifications. I understood how it was kind of put together, but recognised that I didn't ever see myself sort of being an accountant. Yeah. But I recognised it was a skill set that would give me an advantage in the workplace. That understanding of, well, why are we making that decision? Well, because the numbers don't make sense. Well, why don't the numbers make sense? Well, because of X, Y, and Z reason, right? And because of the learning that I took, I was able to say, right, well, how do we cost this? What's the payback period for this position? How does, all the sort of very sort of fundamental things can be applied into the business and the organisation. So yeah, I always had that ambition, but what direction it would take, I didn't know. So yeah,
I've never really seen you as an accountant, but it's interesting that you took that step to drive yourself forward. And obviously, you're still kind of fairly junior in the organisation doing that role. Can you remember that time when actually you saw, actually one day I could be MD of this business, I could own shares in this business? Or was it a journey of circumstance, or was that inner drive in you making that happen?
It was a bit of, I think you've hit it on that eye, it's a journey of circumstance, because I think if you, in my opinion, having kind of gone through that, if you say to yourself, one day I'm going to be a director, that's where I want to get to, you can easily trip yourself up and forget what you're doing at that moment in time. You can
prove yourself in that.
Absolutely.
That hour. Yeah.
It was one thing that frustrated me with some people that I try to sort of coach the position. Yes, you have the ability to get there, but make sure you can do the job now. Don't try and step over that, or don't try and walk past that step, because you'll lose the fundamental reason why you're able to kind of progress through the business and the organisation, and you're going to get ahead of yourself and you'll get slapped down. So the realization is that in truth it was more when I sort of became a member of the board and sort of conversation started to take a different turn. I thought, there is the possibility around doing this. At that time back then, no, it wasn't in my sort of thinking that would be part of the position in Britannia, or anywhere for that matter.
And how did you need to change and develop? You talked about going to night school, learning a financial qualification, understanding the finance and business model of a business. Yeah. But how did you fundamentally change as a human being, and what other skills did you have to develop to accelerate at the pace you did through the organisation?
Some of it does come down to, you've got to have a good work ethic, right? You can't, and it comes back to that point I've just mentioned about, don't get ahead of yourself. You've got to learn.
Some blood, sweat and tears.
Yeah. You've got to put the graft in. If you're coming through the business, you can't just expect to suddenly jump through 3 steps very, very quickly. So I kind of learned from an early age. When I left school and started working. So I kind of learned from that early age that you've got to work hard. You've got to be able to kind of put the hours in. And the thing that I wanted to do, and I would I would go out into car parks at 1-2 o'clock in the morning. If we had 24-hour operations, how do you know the people are doing their job? Well, you go there and you see it, and you pick up on what's going on. You then find them with their hand in the till. You kind of go through those kind of lower level motions to make sure that you fully understand what's going on in the business. And I was very fortunate that, being in a relatively small organisation at the time, those little things that then made that difference, saying, right, well, we've identified that this is happening in that location, we've fixed this problem, and then the revenue started to increase. And what do shareholders want? They want revenue, right? So, as a result, my stock went up quite quickly through that kind of just working hard. And look, I could...
Smart and hard.
Yeah, right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, no, totally. And making changes in the organisation that made a difference. And there were some few fortunate things along the way. You said, what was that kind of sea change? So 2006, I was put into this coordination role. Within 3 weeks, the Southwest regional manager had a very serious health condition, and suddenly I've got to run his region. Sort of 3 weeks ago, I'm doing doing invoicing,
numbers.
doing numbers and invoicing, and then suddenly I'm there.
Yeah.
Okay, I've got this car park.
See your opportunities.
Yeah, and you can kind of recognise it, but you never at that point. I never thought I'm going to become a director. Or I'm going to become operations director. Certainly not. No sights on MD or chief exec and being involved in exit or equity. Not at all. No.
Okay. Well, and what year did you become MD?
2014. So end of 2013 conversation, or in 2013 conversations were taking place, and 2011 I was appointed to the board as ops director, and it was kind of that realization from Graham, who was the owner at the time, his realization that he needed to change the business direction, and that there was the timing was right to kind of make that transition. Yeah.
And was it a pinch yourself moment?
No, I mean, truth be told, I actually was I was actually headhunted, and I was in the operations role, and there was a company that came in that we were going to use their services, and they said, come up to London and have a meeting with us, and they offered me a job. So, at the time it was 3 times what I was earning. And we'd had sort of some peripheral conversations about, look, at some stage I want you to lead the business forward. There's some sort of post global financial crisis stuff that we've got to sort out underlying with the business, and then we'll have that conversation. And I went back and said, Graham, I don't know what to do with this. I've been given this opportunity, and you've got to remember I've got a young family, and my second daughter's just been born. This is a fantastic career, but also financial opportunity for me. I'm not going to be unloyal to 9 years of service to you, but I've got to give this some thought. And that's when he said, well, give me 24 hours and I'll come back to you. And next thing you know, there's a package on the table that was much more equity structured rather than initial financial reward structured. But that was when it was like, right, okay, well, how can we do this? And the conversation was actually never around money. It never circled around that. It was about, what does the opportunity look like? What do we want to achieve? And that was when the 2 opportunities paled into insignificance. One was an opportunity to go, right, I can grow a business. Yeah. We were talking about a potential exit then at that point. It would have been mine to run versus being a cog in a wheel, a bigger cog, in a bigger organisation and a bigger base opportunity. But we sat down, and it was probably over sort of a couple of months, and eventually told like, right, okay, let's do it.
Let's do this.
Yeah, let's do this. Yeah.
And do you remember those feelings of actually leading a business those first days? Or was it exciting? Was it challenging? Somebody listening to this that might be stepping into that role, what words of wisdom would you?
Oh, well, we've asked for words of wisdom. There's not going to be money. No, so I think that looking back on it now, look, being given that title, managing director, means a lot, right? It means a lot because you've achieved something. But actually, you've got to forget your MD pretty quickly, because it's not about you. Yeah. It's about the team. It's about the business, and it's actually about how you lead that team. You'll be kind of judged on that position. And this was one of the challenges, the biggest challenge that I faced, transitioning from that guy who was out in the car parks making a difference, learning how to do everything, implementing new procedures, making a difference on a site-by-site P&L level, through to running the operational team, through to then leading the business. There is a big change in how you have to manage that, and it takes time. And I got a lot of things wrong in my first 6 months, just wandering around thinking, if I do the same things over and over again, just on a bigger scale, it'll have the same impact. But actually, it became to the point where you have to really recognise that you need to change. You need to look at things differently. You have to think about things differently. And there'll still be times when you're going to go back to your established way of managing things. We've all done the colour works. We all know where our
preferences.
Yeah, we know where our
personality sit.
Yeah. But for me, that was that part of, I wanted to have lots and lots of mini-me's running off doing what I was doing, and actually I didn't. I needed people who were different from me, who could fill in the blanks, and that was that initial part. So actually, I remember phoning my dad up after I'd agreed the terms. Dad, I've become MD of Britannia. I'm 34. This is brilliant. So he said, great. He goes, fantastic, well done, really proud of you. And then the next day it's like, well, okay, what have we actually got to do with this? It's not for me. I know it's and we'll perhaps discuss it a bit later on about when you get to the end of that journey and you sell a business and you've been involved in it, how actually you've got to savor those moments, but you've got to recognize you can't rest on your laurels, because that's when you then go back to that complacency, and you stop driving things forward. And you're the biggest seller in the business. You're the first to go.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And you probably should just. I think what a lot of what you've said there, if I sum it up, it is around is you got to leave the ego behind, haven't you? As an MD, as a leader.
Yeah, yeah.
And time again, perhaps that doesn't happen, and that's where people trip themselves up.
And
organizations don't achieve what they could.
Absolutely right. Yeah, there are particularly towards the end of the thing. I never wanted to. There were times you would have to use it, but I never wanted to walk in and say I'm the chief executive or I'm the managing director. You need to do what I'm saying. It's just that I never wanted to lead by title. To start with, yeah, I would do. I'm the managing director. You must listen to what I'm saying. But that's not leading.
That doesn't get hard.
No. Because you're then just a glorified manager, in my opinion. Because you're using a title to manage, not using your skills to manage, and not
your influence.
Correct, yeah, and your leadership and all those skills that you need to learn to be able to go through it all. But look, there were some short, sharp lessons with that. Sometimes it was dealing with clients, sometimes it was dealing with employees, sometimes it was dealing with employees who were challenging you. And you reflected on it when actually that was a really fair challenge and I didn't deal with that very, very well. Perhaps I did jump down their throat and you've got to go and eat humble pie. And how do you eat humble pie in the right way and without losing face? But I always kind of got to the point of, if I'm wrong, quickly admit you're wrong, apologise and don't put your ego in front of you. Was it the right or wrong decision? If it is the right decision, it's the right decision. Yeah, if it's the right decision for the business, that's what you should want. If it's the right decision for you because of your ego, it's the wrong decision.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Obviously, one of the things, a lot of the listeners to this podcast will be working within an SME or perhaps own an SME. So one of the things that I think from the outside that you did right at Britannia was that shareholder relationship from day one between you and Graham.
Yeah.
So when you look back on that, we'll probably go on to the fact that, over the period of time, Graham became more remote in the business. But at the time he took the MD, he was still living in the UK.
Yeah.
He was part of the business, not necessarily day to day, but he was still part of it actively.
Yeah.
How did you develop the relationship with Graham such that it would be a healthy relationship? And what tips would you give to somebody that's perhaps in Graham's shoes, thinking I'm going to appoint an MD, and what they may think they should do?
So jokingly, the relationship with Graham was a shared fondness of wine. No, I think in all honesty, I have to be really open and say that we had a very unique relationship. He is 20 years my senior. I think the situation was slightly unusual insofar that he took that decision to entrust his business to someone, and he entrusted it to me fully as well. He did take that step back. When he appointed me MD, he goes on chairman because he removed his office from the business. He stopped coming into the office, and it was very much more that kind of that chair MD CEO relationship. I think that it was built on respect because I'd worked for him for a long time and I kind of established that trust and delivered for him. So I had good stock and credibility to start with. I also think that coming back to that openness and honesty piece, and there's some of your podcasts where people have sort of talked about these 5 dysfunctions. We had a great trust of one another. If Graham said he was going to do something, he would do it. If he said, I'm going to award you equity, he awarded me that equity. There was obviously things around it where if I was to leave the business, I wouldn't receive my rewards, but it was fair.
But that's fair and commercial, isn't it?
But we sorted that stuff out at the start from the offset and agreed it, and that became the kind of bedrock of it. And we always said, if we fall out, we've got a piece of paper we can fall back on and we both know where we stand. But it came from the fact that we would have that healthy challenge and debate. And we, over the years, it was 20 years of working together and 10 years, particularly with that kind of him, owner, me, MD, but equity holder as well. We would disagree with each other quite vehemently. And I think you were there at some of those disagreements. But we never took it home, and we were always able, if one of us overstepped the mark, one or either of us would say, okay, look, maybe we read that a bit wrong. How do we fix this? How do we address that? And that does happen. Sometimes people will, in businesses, will fall out and not know how to fix those things. And sometimes it means that the relationships go a bit south or sour. And I know a little bit from other people he'd fallen out with as well, right? So my first mantra was reading it was to go, if something's gone wrong, you tell them straight away. Yeah.
Don't hide it.
But come with solutions. Yeah. And, deliver results. That's what it comes down to. So, yeah, there is an element of uniqueness, but you can replicate that, I believe.
Yeah.
I think you can.
But one of those trends was that trust element, wasn't
Yeah.
it? I mean, maybe that is, when I look back at others, there's others I know that have done it successfully, which is put an MD in, become a bit more remote.
Yeah.
But the ones that have failed have sometimes had that external appointment in, and then they've gone remote and the trust isn't there, and it's always looking over the shoulder.
Yeah.
Whereas actually, you're right. I think the number one thing was trust, the ability to call each other out.
Yep.
But not take it to heart.
Yeah.
And then I suppose that, delivery, I suppose the more you delivered, that trust grows, that commercial kind of awareness, right?
Yeah.
This was the right thing, is a reaffirming decision.
Yeah.
And then people move on, don't they?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you kind of hit home there in terms of advice to other people that are considering doing it, to put an external MD to come in. You could go through 2-3 interviews. They could come and give a fantastic presentation. They could understand your marketplace, your business fantastically well, and then walk in and just not work. And what that then kind of does is it pushes you back down to, I need to stay in this business. And there's a great book, I think it's by Ray Moore, Business Levels, and it talks about how you progress through these 5 levels of a business. And I got it from James Aitken Smith.
Okay.
And it talks about, you start at level 0, which is your SME, and typically, and this will probably be the journey that you went on at Inspire, right? It's you in your bedroom or in your
laptop, phone, and a desk.
Exactly. Yeah. And it puts the analogy in terms of how you kind of transition through those different levels. And when you kind of get to the point of, you start off in level 0, then you go to level 1. You're kind of driving a speedboat, right? And you have to drive that speedboat, but you're nimble and you're agile and you can make decisions quickly. But if you take your hands off the wheel, the business will fail. And then you kind of go up, and you've got a slightly bigger boat, and you've got more crew around it, but it's still you that holds the wheel, holds the chain. But you've got more people around you to support you, so you can say to someone, "Can you run the business for the day?" sort of thing. And then you go into, you've got a much bigger ship, and you're the admiral, and you're driving it forward. You're thinking about the strategy, but you've got a captain there who'll do everything. And that's kind of where myself and Graham were. And then it's in, how do you get to level 4 and level 5? And there's all the sort of stuff that's in and around that.
Okay, sounds like a great book. I've never heard of that before.
Yeah, it's really good. You should give it a look. And it talks about the complexities of what would happen in those circumstances. So, right, we're in level 2 or wherever it might be. We want to get to level 3. We're in level 3, we want to get to level 4. And fundamentally, it's poor choice of people, poor teamwork or cash flow that tend to then drag you back down, and the owner will then get more involved and you stay where you're at. The business fundamentally
goes back to our key.
Yes.
Ron believes I can do it.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And that's credit to Graham. He did take that step and did it.
I was advisor to the business and you both, and I would credit both of you equally why that relationship worked. Because you did what you needed to do. You performed, you delivered. You took the ownership of the business seriously. You transformed it, you grew it. But on the same side, Graham behaved as a chair. Intervened when he needed to, or when he thought it was important. And other than that, I think he supported and mentored you. He was a sounding board.
It was
not necessarily making all the decisions at all. You were doing that, but you would have him as a trusted sounding board.
Yeah, completely. Look, and it's important, obviously, if you're running someone's business, you had the equity, the controlling stake, could make all of the decisions. It's important that you get that kind of sign off and buy-in from him as well when you're making kind of key decisions. And look, because he wasn't in the business, and he was very good to emotionally detach himself from it. He saw it for what it was for him in the end, which was that it was an income stream and then a cash exit. So he didn't place himself in a position where he was passionately attached to the brand. There was no kind of he detached himself from that point of view. So he was very unemotional.
I'd love to have him on the podcast to ask him that question, because when I first did get involved, which was probably around 2007, I would say he was very passionate about the brand, and one of the things a owner doesn't always do well in this transition is let go. They cut the arm off and it would have said Britannia Parking, but he was able to distance himself and move away from that while ensuring others in the business had a passion for it.
And that's, again, that comes down to how that kind of his own leadership position and what he was looking for to achieve. He'd moved into 54, 55 years old when he asked me to kind of step in. He was kind of in a different part of his life and recognised that the business needed to change direction. He wasn't the right person to do that. And that was kind of an interesting thing for me to understand is know when you've reached the limits of what you've reached, and recognise either you've got to bring people in around you to support you, to put you in the right position to continue to grow, or exit.
Yeah. I absolutely wholeheartedly agree.
Yeah.
And you've touched on it there. So, you did take the role in 2014.
Yeah.
We all think about the parking industry being fairly simple.
Yep.
Bit of land.
Yep.
Paint some lines on it.
Yep.
Charge a fee.
Yep.
Charge a parking penalty notice when it all goes wrong.
Yeah.
Or it all goes right for you or wrong for me.
Yeah.
And kind of that's it. But the industry itself went through huge change in that period from probably about 2014 onwards. And you went through a whole huge growth curve in that time as well, didn't you? Now, what did that feel like? And what did you do to make that growth happen? How did you put the rocket fuel behind the business?
So as I mentioned sort of earlier on in the question, said that Graham's original vision for the business was to become a smaller version of NCP. So it's acquire land or acquire car parks and, effectively put good management practices into the site, good security, all the sort of fundamentals. Why would you park in a location? Price points right, or things that if I was to say to most people, why would they want to park where they want to park? Well, they want to be close to where they want to park. They want it to be priced correctly. They want to know that they're going to go back and their car's going to be there and not be broken into. So if you can get those fundamentals right, you'll drive positive revenues, and that's actually what the business was pretty good at when I started there. You can do you can have a great car park in a great location, price it wrong, and no one will park there. Or and there's some examples that can be kind of sort of referred back to. So that was what the business model was about. And I think when I walked in 2004, we maybe had 70 car parks. I think we had 3 or 4 freeholds at the time. Majority of growth was being driven by long leasehold car parks. The challenge that the business faced at the time, it was maybe turning over 10, 11 million pounds. It did grow in 2008 to sort of 18 or 19 million. But a lot of that was on heavy rents on car parks. So some of them were paying £1 million a year to rent a car park. And you're then in a situation where suddenly, a local employer moves out, or the demand disappears, and suddenly you're facing significant losses because the landlord still wants their rental position, and you've got to carry on paying that for 25 years. So that created a number of challenges that had to be sorted out before finished off around sort of 2012. There was a few to finish off when I became MD. But when we sat down and we spoke about what the business plan needed to be, which is the fundamental, one of the reasons why the role itself was quite exciting was I was given the free rein. I said, right, what you got to do is you need to sell all your property, get rid of the debt out of the business, and re-turbocharge it and focus on being a much more smaller, nimbler operator, pivot towards being technology-driven rather than looking at the sort of what I would say the boots on the ground, inefficient way of delivering service, not very good from a scale point of view. And that became what we needed to do. We needed to bed in technology. Now, a lot of companies are doing it. Everyone's heard of the likes of Parking Eye, and there's various different views on how the parking industry, what it should and shouldn't do from a consumer's perspective. But we looked at it in this point of view is that everybody parks a car in some way, shape or form. Well, most people will, right? Yeah. You'll drive a car somewhere. You'll have an interaction with that event at some stage. So people go to a supermarket, they'll go to a pub, they'll go out for dinner. So you've got quite a good marketplace to be able to provide those services. Now, there's lots of people that are providing it, and a lot of it is about how do you control it. So we decided, well, we were going to pivot towards technology, we were going to use ANPR, but we wanted to make sure that we weren't doing what the others were doing because we just became a replication.
Yeah, a smaller version of.
Yeah, correct. Yeah. And I said, well, look, we wanted to be a smaller version of NCP, and that really didn't work, did it? So we pivoted, we changed our direction. I was given the ability to do that, and then it was a point of right, we saw the success that the service that this was providing. We were able to provide that into our established client base. They liked the fact that we were able to reduce our overall overhead delivery about it because we were more effective, and that kind of turbocharged the growth that was behind it. The challenge that then represents is that you're constantly chasing your tail round in circles because you find yourself, right, okay, well, we need this many people to do the job, or we need to move people from being on the ground, as in out in the field, into the office, which is great from an overhead perspective. But you then got to train those people, and then you then need better procedures. And then you find out, well, we're not doing it as we should be doing. We're not meeting what our clients are looking to, what our clients' expectations are. We're sending sending a notice out that shouldn't be sent out, or we're not cancelling tickets quick enough, or whatever it might have been. We had to overcome those growth challenges. Turnover's growing, so from a point of view in terms of my role was to grow turnover and grow profitability. Great, but there was a lot of times I'm thinking that this could quite easily reverse quite quickly if we don't stamp on those things. So there was a lot of time where you are just constantly going around on that hamster wheel, and I'm sure it's the same for every other business as you're growing. It becomes really challenging. Yeah.
At Evolve, we exist to help business owners and leaders like you start, grow, and exit with purpose. Whether it's coaching, peer groups, strategic advice, leadership and development, or just needing some financial clarity, we're here to support every step of your business journey. If you're ready to evolve, we'd love to help you take that very next step. And what did the numbers look like when you exited the business? You talked about 70 car parks, 10 to 11 million turnover. Just so the listeners can get a perspective on that growth.
So I think we'll talk about so curve. So I think when I entered the business, we were turning over about 7 million. It grew to 18 million, and we reversed it back down to about 11 million when I took it to the pivot. Yeah. So it was 11 million turnover, and profitability wasn't particularly high at that point. It was in the tens of thousands. So when we exited, the last set of numbers, so we exited mid-year, but that year we turned over just shy of 25 million, and profits were sort of I think the EBITDA was £4.5 million.
And you were managing how many car parks?
700.
Right, 10 times.
Yeah.
Completely different model.
Completely different model. Yeah, high volume, low revenue per site. Yeah.
And in that growth curve, because there are a lot of people in the grower business, they talk about hitting, and I would recognise this, you hit some brick walls.
Yeah.
Can you remember some of those brick walls that you've faced and had to go through to achieve that significant growth?
Yeah, and it comes back to that book I mentioned earlier in terms of how you progress through the levels of an organisation.
Book that was quite fundamental.
Yeah, and it's people, positions, right? When you're growing really, really quickly, you'll have people that have maybe been in the business for 50, maybe 20 years, who you have a massive degree of loyalty to, but they're just not. They're not the right people for the business to have any longer. They're blockers to growth, and those were the difficult decisions because you do find yourself quite torn. Let's be quite clear about it. If anyone is running a business, if someone is a bit of a pain, it's quite easy to make the decision to exit them. But when somebody's not doing a bad job, but they're not the right person in the organisation, they're too stuck in their ways, or they came in and added an X factor to the business for 9, 10, 12, 24 months.
The
business now
skills.
Outgrows. They come in. Let's give an example. They come in. They're brilliant at sales, but they can't manage a sales team. You find yourself and you go, what's the decision that needs to be made? Well, they want to move forward, but you can't move them forward. So the blocker was always recognizing that the team changes very, very quickly, and sometimes people will give you that accusation of lack of loyalty. The question I always ask myself whenever Graham and I sat down, is this the right business decision? Is this the right decision for the business? And if the answer is yes, you make the decision. And that was the biggest war.
That was team and people were the biggest challenge.
Yeah.
And recognising it and doing something about it.
Yeah, and also your own skill set as well, right? You coming back and you do the old analogy, you teach someone to fish, they'll be able to feed themselves. So give a man a fish, you feed him for a day, teach him to fish, he can feed himself. But it goes on a little bit further than that. And I read it somewhere, it said, if you show someone where to fish, where all the fish are, they'll go in and they'll find those fish. And the story goes is, this guy goes along and finds this group of people, and they don't know how to fish. So he teaches them to fish, and then he teaches them where to fish. So that's where you're going to get your income from. And then goes, right, I'm done here, and off he goes. Comes back 6 months later to find they're starving again. Why? Because they've cut the tree down that was above where all the fish was, and that was feeding the fish. So they don't understand the marketplace. But using that analogy, that is a typical kind of piece, and it says it in this book that's a typical piece of, you need to show people the marketplace, and you need to continually spend that time developing your team and teaching them new skills all the time. You cannot just say to them, right, there you go off and fish. You need to teach them why you fish, why you shouldn't cut the tree down, where the bigger fish are, how, and that comes around strategy and continually kind of working. You cannot just go off and go, I'm leaving you guys to it for 6 months, because the business will change and evolve, and it will come back down, and you need to bring people up with you to do that.
We talked about how the business changed from 2014 to 2024, that growth.
Yep.
But how did Brian Parker change in that 10 years? What was different about Brian Parker 10 years into the role as MD compared to the guy that sat in the chair in 2014?
I think it comes down to the biggest change is that I'd like to think, and this comes down to the ColourWorks profiles, because I had one done in 2015 and another one in 2022. I changed more from a sort of director leader to a coaching leader.
Okay.
So more kind of, rather than saying do this, saying, and it comes back to that analogy I've just given you, why should we be doing this? What direction do we need to take? Why are we taking that direction? Look, there's always going to be times when you're stressed and under pressure. You go, just do this, please. Yeah. Or words to a lesser than that extent. And you'll go, you need to do this. I'm not happy with performance. You have to pull people up. And sometimes that will be done in a way and people don't like. But the one thing that I was very conscious that I wanted to change is that whatever exit we went to, my role would have to continue to develop and evolve, and I needed to have people underneath me who I could trust in the same way that Graham trusted me, and I needed to be better at developing them. I'd like to think I was a better leader when I left than when I started. I still have my drawbacks.
That will.
Yep, they will. But I was much more questioning and challenging rather than do it this way.
So less directive, less ego, more collaborative.
Correct, yeah. I think.
Yeah. Okay. And just again, I think there's so much in your own journey and that relationship with Graham, what he did right and all of those kind of things. But one of the things he did do right was give you those share options and ultimately some direct equity as well.
Yeah.
I hope you don't mind me sharing. And
no, of course, yeah.
How did that make you feel? Because I think that's quite an important lesson for those owners that are perhaps holding back giving away some options or equity.
Well, I think that let's be clear about it. It makes you feel very motivated. Okay, it makes you feel very wanted, and it makes you feel very appreciated, and it also makes you feel that you're together on that journey. And I was pretty fortunate. I got a pretty good slice of equity out of the situation, but you've also got to look at it from Graham's perspective as well. So the business valuation that we won't talk specifically about what the exit number was, but I seem to recall that the initial business valuation that you did when I walked in as MD. We sold it for sort of 10 or 12 times where the valuation was from a fiscal point of view. So Graham actually gave nothing away at all.
Yeah. Just a smaller proportion of a much larger part.
Yeah. So by, if you look at it from that point of view, what he did is he created a great deal of wealth for himself by doing that.
And do you think your behaviour would have been different if you hadn't had the equity?
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd have just been bonus driven, month to month driven. The decision is that, and this comes down to anybody that's thinking about going into that role and about how you're going to go through that exit. Your decision making process, if you're looking at an exit, is different if you're driving the business day to day, in my opinion, because if you want to drive lifestyle business, right, you want as much profit day one as you can. You want to be able to draw that profit out of the business or use it to put into other businesses to invest, right? If you want to drive exit value, you want to know how secure that revenue stream is. An investor's going to want to know that. So I was always pushing on how we drove contracts in the direction of long-term exit value, which aligned me with what Graham was going to do.
Whereas without the options or the equity, you would have been right, how much profit can we make today, this month, this year?
To drive my bonus, yeah.
And then drive that bonus.
Yeah.
And do you feel it did work? There were some tough times in that journey, but do you think it worked as a retention tool as well? Do you think it did tie to the business?
Well, yes, because, specifically the way it was agreed, because the amount of equity was received, there was a step every year. So, it would, and then, there would be a situation where if I was to leave, my reward would be lower. So yes, it did lock me in. Did that sometimes have a negative effect on me? I would say there were times when I felt a little bit like...
If you're like padlocked, handcuffed.
Business. Yeah. And then you got to put your big boy pants on and accept the fact that someone's trusted you to run your business and get on and do the job, But that's where, the kind of advisors and people you have around you is really important when you get to the top of the tree, because it's quite hard. It's quite a lonely place to be. Yes, Graham was great, but he wasn't always present. You and I know from this, he was quite an active holiday person. So trying to catch up with him and sometimes have those chats or have those chats. I couldn't walk into the office. Like, if you have a bad day and your line manager's giving you a bit of a hard time for something you think you've been treated a bit unfairly and you're on the same team, right? You could probably go, so-and-so's been a bit of a jerk to me today. Yeah, no, I get it. He can be a bit that way, but, just leave him to it and he'll come round, or, she'll come round to it at the end of the day, or they will. So you can have that kind of sounding board at that position. You can't walk out into the office and say, Graham's been a bit of a git to me today. We've had a bit of a row. Can I have a bit of sympathy, please? Because people would see that as a sign of weakness, and
they don't want to hear it, do they? That would upset me.
No. They want clear direction. They want leadership, and so that was really important to me as I went through that kind of journey, was to find advisors around me who knew the situation could come in. We had a great non-exec that came in towards the end of the exit, who was really valuable in that for me on that level as well, because Graham was very distant at that point, and it really was valuable for me. And that's kind of the advice I'd give is that have good people around you.
Yeah,
really important. Yeah,
it's interesting because I know back on my journey with Britannia, from coming as sort of like a FD on demand, in the early days of Inspire, doing the numbers, doing the auctions, doing evaluation, doing all of that nuts and bolts kind of constructive advice. Whereas I think the last 3 or 4 years that it was nearly as this spiritual sounding board at times between you to help foster that healthy relationship, to give you both a place to see each other's perspective.
Yeah, no, exactly, because a lot, in truth be told, we said we wanted to exit within 5 years. COVID came along, various other different challenges along the way, which meant that the exit was actually 10.5 years from when we came in. So there was, from Graham's perspective, he was delayed in terms of his retirement planning. My own personal journey took longer than would have originally anticipated. And there's times when that becomes quite frustrating because you're faced with that scenario of, when does this change? For me personally, I'd gone from starting in the business to becoming MD within 9.5 years, and then suddenly 10.5 years later, I'm still MD, or chief exec, whichever you want to say. So yeah, you've got to have that realization that having options does come with some and having equity comes with a tie into the business. But look, the rewards are there, and if you do a good enough job, you'll get your just reward. So it's not bad.
We'll go on and talk about the exit process now. So you talked about you wanted to be on a 5-year journey. It turned out to be a 10-year plus journey. But can you just remember that moment in time? COVID did take a business hit, business bounced back.
Yeah.
Was there that kind of moment in time that you went, right, now is right to sell, or was that against circumstance?
Well, it was kind of, we recognised that probably start last year, so a couple of years ago, would have been the time we were going, it feels about right. Interest rates had settled down. Everybody know what happened in the marketplace. Just generally, multiples that were being paid for businesses were quite high because of interest rates. They went up, multiples softened, the business had taken a bit of a hit, so we needed to kind of rebuild where we were. So 2 years ago, we were kind of getting to the point where we felt that we'd had everything tidied up. All of our contracts have been tied in for longer term. We could take the business to market. But the realisation really hit in terms of physically for the transaction. We actually had a cold approach. We were approached off market, everyone know that the business was sold to Q Park, and they were not in our buy list. They were a buyer that we didn't envisage from a trade perspective would be interested, because there was just no alignment with what they did in the marketplace and what we did. So we just didn't understand it to start with. But the more we kind of went through that position, it was like, okay, this could be quite real. They're well funded. They're backed by KKR. They're a €1 billion turnover business. So they're not short of cash. This isn't a pipe dream. This isn't somebody picking up the phone. And they've got to kind of really piece something together here. There's a genuine reason they're acquisitive. And when we sat down and had that kind of first set of preliminary discussions, Graham and I both looked and said, we've got nothing to lose here. And it kind of then was the trigger of, let's give them the opportunity. If they can deliver and meet the expectations that we set, then fine. If not, then we go to market. And so I
was going to ask you about that, because there's this whole debate. Do you do a closed deal process, or do you go open to market? Mm-hmm. You made a decision that you'd set some parameters by the sound of it. They said, well, we'll do the closed deal process, but it's got to hit these marks. Having taken some advice, it needs to look and feel like this. Yeah. If it gets to those expectations, we'll do the deal. Is that right?
Yeah, kind of. Yeah. They approached us sort of early September. We had a coffee with them in late September. NDA was signed up. So we were already fully advised as well. So the process was quicker than if they'd have approached us and we didn't have KPMG on board. So we were well down the route on terms of how we would present the business to them. Initial round of offer wasn't accepted, rejected, very clear position of this is what it needs to look like. Funnily enough, they said, actually, it looks, now we're paying more, it looks more attractive. It's funny how the world works.
Private equity.
Yeah, I know. So we said, fine, but, here's the timelines, here's the parameters, it's full exit, no deferments, etc. Graham and I looked at each other in the eye and said, are we happy with this? Yes, we are. And then it's
go do the deal,
go
execute.
Yeah,
which is easier said than done, isn't it? What did that due diligence process look like?
So this is the thing. Look, selling any business is hard, right? And I think this is the thing. For people that are listening to this that haven't been through the process and they're thinking about it,
was it harder than you envisaged?
Yes and no. Yes and no. I knew it would be difficult. I didn't know how frustrating it would become. And there's certain parts of it that you kind of get. You can talk through and you can walk people through stuff. I don't know what I should or shouldn't say, but we had a tax advisor who came on a call and said, what are the company cars used for? And I felt like telling someone was used to deliver milk, mate. What do you think? It's like, it's pretty obvious, they're used by the staff to drive around the country to do their job. But because of the fact that it was backed by KKR, because of the fact that the overall owner was of that level, what I hadn't appreciated was how much covering needed to be done from the advisor's point of view so that they could sign off to say the transaction was sound and okay. Yeah. So it wasn't so much from them checking that the business was sound. It was them kind of saying, yes, it is. And by the way, we've asked all the questions that we need to ask. And, I once said to someone, they said, how does it kind of feel when you're going through it? I said, it was like, so let's say you got 100 clients. It would be like selling a 100-bedroom mansion, and every single room you have to explain what's gone on in every single room. Yeah. Oh, when did you last change the light switches? Who did you use to change the light switches? Have you got the receipt for that light switch? And you find it really, really frustrating. And there was a point when I picked the phone up to our lawyers, who thankfully weren't a point scoring position, and just said, tell the other side to get a grip, because they're doing my nut in now. Yeah, you're up at 6 o'clock in the morning on a call because the advisors are then going to be talking to the other side's advisors. You'll then get, we're agreed on this, and then they'll go back, they found something, and you've just got to be really prepared to be prepare for the unexpected,
and be resilient, isn't it? It's being resilient through this whole process.
Yeah, and that comes back to the point of having the right people around you. You've got to get on. I always work on the people on the basis of, you don't have to like the people you work with. You got to respect them, right? But there is an advantage if you've got a corporate finance advisor there. If you're planning on going through this journey, get to know them really well. Know when you can speak to them, know how they are as individuals, get them to know you, get them how they can calm you down, how they can help you in those moments when you're getting really frustrated with the process. And the same with your lawyers as well. Pick the lawyers, that are best suited to you. And we were really fortunate. Both KPMG and DWF did a great job, and a great job in some instances of calming myself and Graham down.
Saying, take a breath.
Yeah. It was really. Looking back on it, it's a massive learning thing. It's a great process to go through. But when you're sat there and you're going, we said this is going to be 8 weeks, guys. You're now at 12, and we're still nowhere near feeling like you're close. You then, how do you apply pressure? Who applies the pressure? Yeah. How do you do that? And you see
lots of subtleties in it, isn't it?
Yeah, it's that fine piece of, I'm still talking to the buy side MD, and our relationship remains relatively strong, but you don't know whether that discussion is a little bit of lip service. I'd like to think it was, and there's still a respect there. We still speak to one another. I'm really pleased.
We've got a deal done.
Yeah, correct. Yeah, but you don't know, how much of it how much you can or can't say. Do you then go to the part of, we got to the point where the exclusivity expired, and to hold their feet to the flame, they said, can we extend for another 2 weeks? We said no.
Off we go.
Yeah. Get the deal done. You've got everything, and you keep introducing new stuff. So the answer is no, guys.
And in all of that process, you talk about frustration, resilience. When it goes wrong on a seller side is where deal fatigue does pop in.
Yeah.
And you start making compromises and you start giving. How did you ensure that, obviously just stubbornness, that you didn't suffer from deal fatigue and roll over on points?
I think looking back on it, our deal, the actual length it took. So we were January. We agreed exclusivity. We actually signed early May and executed 5 weeks later because we had a split exchange and complete. And that is the one thing that I would say to people: if you can avoid that, do. Okay, we had to, because we had to go to the Competition Commission. They wouldn't sign it off. They wouldn't do the deal without it for various different reasons that I won't bore your listeners with. But that was the biggest issue behind it, because it just creates this whole degree of uncertainty around you're effectively still own the business. The buyers have a right to buy the business, but there are certain things you're not allowed to do. And if certain things happen, you have to report it to the buy side, and if you don't, you're outside of the agreement, etc. As a lot of people know. So, in answer to your question, when you look at it from that perspective, it was only 5 months. So that's how we managed to avoid it, because I think we were quite quick in execution. As you were going through the process, it felt like it was 6 years as far as I was.
Because your life does get put on hold.
It does, yeah.
And life, everything else you love to do in life, just
you're surviving on 2 hours sleep. You're snapping at everybody for stupid reasons. You're falling out with your family, your friends, your colleagues, everything, and you're finding it really quite challenging to that point. Somebody phones you up at 11 o'clock at night, and you're going, oh, "Why am I talking about this at 11 o'clock at night?" And then you're going, and you then get into point scoring positions, and that's the deal fatigue piece, because you're going, and that's actually, to be honest, where there was a really good value in the relationship with. I was doing the diligence, Graham was away from it, and we had a conversation one night, like the detail of what it was about. I said, I'm really frustrated with this. They're holding us over a barrel. We're trying to do this, we're trying to do that. I really want to push back on it. He goes, it doesn't matter. He goes, I'm perfectly content to concede on this point, because it just simply doesn't matter. It's not going to affect our price. It's not going to affect anything.
brilliant.
Yeah, it just doesn't matter. It's not.
And that's the other thing about deal fatigue. You can lose your perspective. You can give, but you lose perspective, and you start bumping heads. You don't necessarily. And to have somebody say that must have been really valuable.
Yeah, it was, yeah.
And at the time, you're still running the business day to day. So how did you manage that? Or was that just a case of working hard?
I'm going to say I was relatively fortunate because of the relative speed of the transaction, looking back on it. And I did have a very good team as well. And kudos to them, and my thanks to them as well, was they were able to run the business day to day. I was able to take that step back. I stopped. It was probably a period of 2 months where I didn't go in the office. And everyone knew something was up, but the business didn't know that we were selling. We hadn't even announced it to anybody. For the first couple of months I was coming into the office, I was still doing the diligence and dropping in and out. But when it got to that last part of intensity, barrage of calls and different questions coming in, I removed myself from the business entirely. So I was fortunate that, coming back to that, what would you do? How would you lead a team? How did my style change? I'm fortunate that actually when the exit came, it came when it did, because I think 6 or 7 years before that, the business would have needed me a lot more than what it did at the end. And it also pointed to the fact it was the right time for me to exit, because I went with the transaction.
And how did the, I suppose this leads on to the question, how did the emotions feel the day you signed? Can you remember that feeling?
Well, it's 2 stages, you see, Warren, because there's the day that we exchange, and there is a very funny story to that. So there's the day we exchange contracts. We were on this split exchange and complete. So we then completed 5 weeks later. There were conditions around it that had to be met. It was predominantly around the Competition Commission and some of our contracts. Regulatory piece, and the fact that we had a couple of clients, large clients, had a change of control clause that we had to get sorted out. So there was the elation in terms of the relief. It was a relief when the deal was signed. And actually it was signed. It is a typical thing, isn't it? It's you get that call at 10:30 at night, that you've exchanged contracts. And I remember just going having a quick beer, went to bed, and it hit me the following morning. I came downstairs at 4 o'clock in the morning, and I wrote an email to all of the advisors who'd helped, everyone that had been involved in the deal, thanking them for and it wasn't a generic email, it was for their individual contributions to getting us to the point where we had exchange. Because there was a time when I thought the deal was going to go. I genuinely thought, we're not going to get through this. This isn't going to happen. And I remember feeling an emotional sense of relief, and I was quite tearful at that point, because I was also realising it's now coming to an end. I'd signed my own settlement agreement the day before to sack myself in 5 weeks' time. So I recognised that was a kind of the hard graft had been done, but I also recognised that the deal could still fall over. So it was kind of a bit of a bittersweet moment. And then, truthfully, 6 weeks later, I felt nothing.
Yeah,
It's anybody else has gone through it, and I know you have as well. You get this tiny email that says, we're pleased to report the transaction is now concluded. And I couldn't have felt more hollow or empty.
Yeah, numb is how to describe it.
Because
you think you can have this feeling of elation and succeeding, but numbness.
Yeah, you kind of look at it and you think, oh, we're gonna suddenly someone's going to turn up with a bag of money and some champagne. It's going to be like the Wolf of Wall Street. So but you just kind of go, oh, that's it. And over that kind of ensuing period. The other thing, obviously, you look in your bank account, there's no money there to start with, right? So you kind of think, oh, I've been ripped off. But it kind of then gradually sinks in over time. And there's that realization that, we have achieved something that's quite important, and for me personally to have, to start at that, you start to reflect a little bit and go, I started this business in 2004, 20 years later, I sold it. 20 years later, I was in
your life.
Yeah. And you go, okay, now the money's come in, and you start talking about what's going to change, how life's going to be different. And I mean, actually, to a certain degree, it's great. Okay, it's not hide behind anything, but it's in terms of the overall piece, it's a little bit of an irrelevance, because when you look back and say, what am I most proud of? The fact that my family is financially secure, obviously. But actually, when you look back and say, I spent 20 years in the business and
the journey,
it was amazing.
Journey,
so, yeah.
And I think that numbness comes, I think that numbness is it for many of us when we're leading a business in the same way you and I have, and you've said it, you've actually gone on a journey with that. There's a huge emotions. It's part of your identity, isn't it? So, I think that immediate feeling of numbness or nothingness is that you realise that there's a little bit of grieving to be done.
Yeah, completely. Look, I won't hide behind it. So particularly on that particular day, and I'd imagine if other people, so we went through a trade exit, and I exited 3 months later. I hung around as a consultant, but in real terms, my time came to an end that day, because I resigned as a director. I was settled. I was out. And, but nobody turned up that day from Q Park. It was like, okay. So I told the members of the management team that didn't know what was going on. I sort of informed them and said, look, they're coming down tomorrow. Takeover's going to start then. But I really didn't know what it was going to look like, because when you look back on it, it was quite a quick transaction. And I remember sort of getting a little bit emotional when I announced the team that we had sold, because it was just a realization that it comes to the end. I was pleased with what happened. And I remember feeling a bit emotional the day that I left. I went in the office and said goodbye to everybody, packed my desk up and went, I'm done. Goodbye,
So we're now nearly 18 months old with that exit.
Yeah.
What's the life been like for Brian Parker in the last 18 months? How have you felt? Lessons learned, again, I suppose would be the question.
Yeah, look, I mean, it's, because there was a little bit still of a tie to the business, for me, it's probably only been the last 3 or 4 months where I've really been able to have that proper period of reflection about what it looks like. The interesting thing, going back to that point of the morning after we'd exchanged, I remember feeling that kind of that emotional piece around, what have physically been achieved, but then also thinking, what's next? What does that look like next? And I've taken some time. Look, I've been in helping another business who have grown massively quickly, actually quicker than we were growing, and just working with those guys at the moment to kind of sort of give them some pointers around, what do you want to achieve with your business? You need to think about this, some of the learning positions that I've taken from it. But for me personally, it's now, I've kind of assessed the fact that it's been a great experience to do all that. The time with Britannia was brilliant. There were some great lessons learned from that in terms of what to do right, what went well, what went wrong, and look, I'm happy to admit I made quite a few mistakes, a lot. Learned from them, changed some of them, and there was definitely some things that I would do differently going back in time. And I want to use that experience and help other people now, because it's hard. Yeah. The rewards are there. We had the budget a few weeks ago when it was talking about, people living on the breadline. We've been in a very fortunate position that we don't do that. Okay. So it's not hard in that regard, but it's still hard mentally, physically. You still want to get up every day and feel rewarded. So it's now for me, in terms of, period of reflection, what's now important to me is purpose in life. What's the purpose of getting up every day? And if I can potentially go in and help other businesses and think back on those conversations that Graham and I had, or Graham and David, who was in helping the business non-exec, and when they turned and said, it's okay. It's all right. It's okay not to be okay, as they say nowadays. then yeah, that's really where I think that there's a good opportunity to do that, because I valued having that, and it was really important. And obviously the conversations that you and I had over the years, when I was sometimes going, when's it going to end, Warren? When will this all be over? Just give me 50 quid and I'll go. So yeah, I think good opportunity. Look, I had a few parties in the end. I had those kind of moments, but you kind of box it off quite quickly. Yeah. I think I'm a pretty achievement-driven individual.
You're still young.
Yeah.
You're still young. There's got to be a what next, isn't it? You've got to go. And there's another rodeo in you, as I said to you the other day.
Yeah, it's just a question of which ball, right?
And I'd just like to finish with what did drive you, and that drive and that inner desire to succeed, it is still there, or has it changed, do you think? I know you now say I want to do something with purpose, but how's your drive changed, and what did originally drive you?
So look, coming back to the financial piece, knowing that you have financial options is obviously just change your mindset. It gives you benefit of choice around what you want to do. And it comes back to that question you asked me about at times feeling trapped in the business. And there were moments when that was the case, and that frustration that it kind of grew. But it didn't change the fact that coming back to the morning after we'd exchanged, it was what's next, not when's the money going to hit my bank account, when am I going to be able to potentially pay the mortgage off, or put my money in my pension, or go on holiday, or do this and the other. It was what's next.
What's the next challenge?
What's the next challenge? Because everybody has to get up in the day to earn a living, right? You don't pay the bills by volunteering, but it's challenge that's important, and having that ability to go, you can have a challenge and make effective change in organisations. That's really important, because that's what I felt I did, and I did it pretty well. I think we changed the balance of the organisation, and I drove value for the shareholder and myself. So and members of the team as well. So
that would be a definition of business success. But I always end the podcast with a question about what's your definition of personal success, Brian?
Well, look, I mean, I think we can touch on it here today, can't we? You and I have both been involved in local charities, and I think that's and one of the things that I'm perhaps most pleased is I've had the time over the last 12 months. I did my first marathon this year, raised a lot of money for the charity. I spent nearly 5 years as chair and 6 years as a trustee, and 10 years involved with that. That is a real great sense of purpose you get from that, helping people that are part of it. And that's the thing I suppose I would want to have, is that nice balance now, is to be able to go, right, I can have business success, which gives me a sense of achievement, a sense of drive, but also have a sense of purpose, that you're doing things that have the right, that create the right outcomes as well. You wanted to have that ability to say, I got up today and I did this and it had a positive impact.
Brilliant. So, Brian, thank you. Well, it's been a great conversation. It's been so good to have you as a guest finally on the Evolve to Succeed podcast.
Thanks for having me. I really appreciate the invite. Well, thank you very much.
Thank you. What a great individual. What a great human being. Brian alluded to at the end that we'd both been involved in the same charity. I was actually chair of that charity, Julia's House, an amazing charity. And I remember at the time I was stepping down as chair and Brian was on the board, and him wanting to take the role. That conversation reminds me of why that was the case. And a great story, and hopefully some lessons learned from us all during the course of that conversation. And if you're enjoying the podcast, please help us by subscribing to the podcast on your favourite channel, and also finding out a bit more about Evolve by going to evolveadvisory.co.uk. Until next time, thank you.